Okay, class, where we were again, just to start, well, the four tunics are four layers of the stomach. What do we have? A mucosa, that's one, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa. Those are the four. The mucosa we're going to talk about is kind of modified. It has special cells. See those different colors? The muscularis is something different too. Something different. The other two are pretty much the same, but this here has three layers. Normally we had a longitudinal and a circular, but we have an oblique. And what I was saying in the last video was that's because the food needs to be cut from more of a bolus, chunks of food, into a malt type of liquid malt known as chyme. And this assists in cutting that food up in a slurry mixture where enzymes can really mix with it then. And as I alluded to, what comes out through here, those little 3 mils, we talked milliliters, is that chyme. So chyme ought to go into the small intestine. All right. So we go further. The mucosa is a simple columnar epithelium. Let's go here. The mucosa, this epithelium is a simple columnar, composed of mucus cells that produce a cloudy 2-layer of alkaline mucus. See, let me kind of tell you the reason. What you want to have is, you want to have mucus here, and you want to have a basic pH, because you're going to have acid come out and work with protein, but you don't want to eat your stomach up. You don't want an ulcer. So the simple columna are composed of mucus that produce a cloudy 2-layer coat of alkaline mucus, which the surface layer consists of a viscous, insoluble, trapped bicarbonate-rich fluid. Bicarbonate, remember, is a base. And what you're trying to do is not allow the acid to get to your stomach, but to work in the lumen of the stomach. The smooth line is lined by dotted gastric pits. See those dots, those gastric pit stuff is shooting out of here, which leads into gastric glands that produce the various gastric juices. So the glands shoot through the pits into the stomach. But up here you'd have mucus. Because see these mucus cells right there, they're the ones at the top. They're doing the mucus. And this is going to be the acid stuff and everything coming from there we'll look at. But understand this. You need an alkaline mucus sitting there so you don't eat through the stomach when you start sending gastric juices from these cells here. Okay, the cells forming the walls of the gastric pits are primarily mucus cells. That's the ones up here. But the gastric glands differ in different regions of the stomach. So as we go through the fundus versus the body versus the antrum, it differs. Okay, in the cardia, entrance and pylora are mucus. Because see, what you don't want to do in the cardia is send what? That gastric stuff back. Let's go here. You don't want to send acid back here. So you want a lot of mucus there. So anything that comes across has kind of been nullified. Here, I don't want to send acid into the duodenum. Now, even though you hear ulcers, gastric ulcers, the most common ulcer is in the duodenum. Duodenal ulcers are far more common than gastric ulcers. But at the entrance and the exit, you want to kind of neutralize that acid. So you want a lot of mucus, so it can't get to the surface of the epithelium. The pyloric antrum produces mucus and hormones. We'll talk about hormones in here. The major one is something called gastrin, gastrin. The fundus and body are where the most work is done. The fundus and the body. Now this is more storage, but the body is really where a majority of the action is going to happen in that body. Okay, we saw this. Okay. Right there. Now, let me just okay. The mucous neck cells produce mucus. The parietal cells right here, which we'll be coming to, produce your hydrochloric acid. So you can kind of start reading on this. Remember now, the videos help some. My PowerPoints and my website help, but you still need to look at the text, and you need to use a combination of all three. You need to make it a confluent activity of all three, and any notes that you also take. All right. So parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid, and we'll talk about that. But they also secrete something we talked about in the blood chapter. They're the ones that secrete intrinsic factor. Here we go. Intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor was the chemical that helped vitamin B12 get absorbed in the small intestine. The chief cells secrete some zymogens. They secrete some zymogens that we'll talk about, the chief cells. Okay. And then we have the enteroendocrine cells, which secrete hormones, one being gastrin. Now, the chief cells, for example, you say, what? A zymogen is a precursor enzyme. And they secrete something, for one example, called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen. See that ogen? That means precursor, inactive of an enzyme. Inactive. And the hydrochloric acid assists in activating it. So when you read on it, you'll see. But we're going to talk about it. I'm just giving you. So enteroendocrine, these produce hormones, one being gastrin. Parietal cells, hydrochloric acid, and that intrinsic factor. And chief cells, for example, do a pepsinogen, let's say, for right now. Okay? So mucous neck cells, let's go back here. Where are we? Mucous neck cells secrete a thin acidic mucus. Okay? Parietal cells, chief cells, enteroendocrine cells. Now, they secrete an acidic mucus, but within there is trapping bicarbonate. Bicarbonate. The only reason it's an acidic mucus is because you're getting some acid coming up from this part. But they're trapping bicarbonate, which then what? Nullifies that. Okay, so we go further. All right, so this is how this is going to go. Let's play this one out. All right, here. Here are the parietal cells. What did I say they secrete? Right here. Hydrochloric acid. The enteroendocrine cells secrete something called pepsinogen. Now, this is an enzyme that helps break down protein. This is a what? Enzyme that helps break down protein. Okay, this is the first time we've started breaking down protein. Okay, what happens is the cell secretes pepsinogen. Okay, the cell secretes, shouldn't have said that. These chief cells, I said enteroendocrine. This chief cell right here, let me clarify. Let me make it. This chief cell secretes pepsinogen. The enteroendocrine secrete gastrin. So let me say it again. This chief cell secretes pepsinogen right here. These are chief cells. These here. And all of these would be secreting this zymogen. These chief cells. Okay. We haven't gotten to the enteroendocrine. That's going to do gastrin, but we'll talk about that. The parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid splits the pepsinogen protein into pepsin. That opens up the active site. Remember AP1? That opens up the active site. So the ogen precursor, because you don't want to break down proteins when you don't have no proteins in your stomach, then you're going to break your stomach down. So hydrochloric acid, and we'll see how that does that in a minute. Hydrochloric acid converts pepsinogen to pepsin. Pepsin is a proteolytic enzyme. It breaks down proteins. It breaks down protein. Remember, everything needs to be absorbed in a monomer. So I'm trying to get a protein into basic amino acids. Now, here's where we get into a feedback. Once you make some pepsin, pepsin itself can act as an enzyme to break down pepsinogen. So the minute I get some pepsin, pepsin can feed back and act as an enzyme to make more pepsin from pepsinogen. That's what this is trying to show. But to initiate the action, I need hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells. Okay? So we go a little further here. So remember, I said something about endocrine doing but again, I'm saying again, let me clarify. The chief cells secrete pepsinogen. You're going to do gastrin, as I mentioned before, and then may have said one time that this did the pepsinogen. I want to make sure you clarify that. Glands in the fundus and body produce most of the gastric juice. Parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid, a pH of 1.5. It denatures protein in food and activates pepsin, and also kills many bacteria. So in other words, the job of hydrochloric acid is to denature protein, bend them out of shape, in other words. Bend them out of shape. Try to get them ready to be broken down to basic amino acids. Activate the pepsin and any bacteria that get in there. Now, I won't say all, because we're going to get some bacteria like this. See, y'all are kind of young, but an old statement used to be, one man's fish is another man's fowl. It's individual-like. You know, up north, they have that polar bear club. I don't know how many know about it. The people like to swim in very cold water. That's what they like. That's what they like. So you say, how is this tying to this? These bacteria love this pH. Most bacteria hate it. Most bacteria hate it. These bacteria love that. That's their heyday. They love it. So those are the ones that are more responsible for causing ulcers. They assist with other aspects. Old days used to be thought that hydrochloric acid did it completely. Now we know this did it. In association with the hydrochloric acid. So my point is, kills many bacteria, but what didn't I say? Kills all bacteria. See? And then intrinsic factor, we talked about that from parietal cells. Okay, let's go further. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen. Let's go back to our picture. Chief cells, as I look, secrete pepsinogen. Activate the pepsin by hydrochloric acid, and then pepsin has a positive feedback on it to make more happen. Chief cells also secrete an insignificant amount of gastric lipase. Now, you don't do much lipid digestion in the stomach. Now let's think about lipids. You had some salivary lipase that did pretty good, but gastric lipase doesn't really do much at all. I mean, there's a little bit of breakdown, but really, I'm going to tell you, the stomach is mainly for protein breakdown and churning the food up. You say, Mike, what's the stomach for? Churning the food up from a bolus to a chyme and working on proteins If you really want to see. Let's go a little further. So then we have the endocrine cells, one being gastrin, another being somatostatin, those cells there, secrete chemical into the lamina propria. Paracrines are local. Then we have this serotonin and histamine. So I'm going to end this video, and we're going to start right here at gastric gland secretions. Try to put it together.